There is no information whatsoever regarding the existence of something called instinct. Animals have something called instinct, and it makes them do things. To begin with, to claim the existence of something non-material refutes materialism. This is ignorance, this is vulgarity, this is foolishness. But the trickery here is to give a name to an action we observe and then present that name as its cause. Atheism has to do this because it has no other capital. To explain this phenomenon of direction from within nature itself is truly the pinnacle of ignorance. Because Islam has only one enemy, and that is ignorance. If atheism could think that much, it wouldn't be atheism. Every idea in atheism is a clear, obvious lie. The existence of a creator is not simply a belief or a matter of personal opinion. Rather, it is often regarded as a statement about the nature of reality itself, independent of what any individual may think or feel. In contrast, to say that there is no creator is, in fact, a belief, a position that someone chooses to hold, often based on their own reasoning or worldview. You see, this distinction is important to understand.
Professor, now these atheists regarding the magnificent deeds of animals, for example, the hexagonal shapes made by honeybees, the honey they make, and behind these magnificent, wonderful deeds of other animals, they say there is instinct instead of a creator. So what is it? Does the bee do this by instinct? I mean, they say there's no need to look for a divine intelligence behind these actions. They say instinct takes care of it. What do you say to that?
Well, there's no need to look for intelligence behind the ones who say such things either. The truth of the matter is this. Instinct is a muddled concept. It's conflated just like the word law. We need to look at both from the same perspective. It seems, and that is this. First, let's talk about the matter of law. Then we can move on to instinct so the matter can be fully understood. There are constants in the universe. Every field we refer to as natural science, whether it is physics, chemistry, or mechanics, each one expresses the existing constants in the universe. Electricity, the constants related to electricity. Physics, the constants related to physics. Chemistry expresses the constants related to chemistry, and because these constants exist, there is a branch of science. The constants in the mechanical structure of matter give rise to the branch of mechanical engineering. The constants in the physical domain of matter give rise to physics. The constants in the chemical domain of matter give rise to chemistry. And the constants in the electrical domain of matter have led to the existence of the science of electricity. We call constants the sciences in science. So in other words, the existence of those constants is the reason for the existence of sciences. And these constants, if these constants can be repeated in the same way, we express them with formulas. Formulas are the expressions of the constants in the universe. So what are these constants called? Laws. Laws are the constants in the universe. We identify the laws, that is the constants, and write them down. In electricity, voltage equals current times resistance, or in free fall, like 1/2 GT squared. We have identified these constants and we write them down. We express this with mathematics, the science of constants. We call the identification of these constants knowledge. We call it science. But science identifies these constants. It does not know the reason for the constants. That is not its job. Science answers the how. In other words, it tells you how it happens.
So the process, yes. Is it the process?
Then, as for why it happens, why does this constancy exist? Science does not look into that. But there is a trick being played here. There is a trick that atheism often plays. When it explains the how, it presents it as if it is also the explanation for the why, the reason for it.
So if the how is explained, is the agent also explained?
It tries to explain it that way. Thus, since most people on the other side don't know about this, it expresses the process of how something happens. It simultaneously substitutes the process for the agent. So therefore, we call the constancies in our universe laws. We do not know why the law exists. What do we know? That the law exists. And when we identify a law somewhere, we have expressed the existence of that constancy. But why does constancy exist? We cannot explain this. I mean, from this point of view, from a scientific point of view, we cannot explain it. That's what we'll say. Therefore, the same situation exists in animals. In animals too, actions of a perfection that we cannot explain or account for take place. We see that these actions exist. We do not see how they exist or why they exist. A bee makes a hexagonal honeycomb. The bee determines its angle according to the sun and where the flower garden is, comes back, performs some movements, and causes the other animals to go there. The other animals that will collect pollen from there. What we see is this. The animal makes this movement, the others do this, the others do that. In the end, a perfect action emerges, and we call this phenomenon instinct. Let's pay attention. Just as we call the constancies in the universe law, law is not the cause of constancy, but its expression. What is called instinct is the name of the perfect action seen in animals. It is not the cause. So atheism, with a bit of sleight of hand, with trickery, because its practice is trickery of atheism, what does it do? It attributes the cause of the constancy it sees here to the constancy itself. There is an action. There is a perfect action. There is an action like a bee making honey. But you look at the bee, you don't see such a thing. There is nothing like that in its substance. No visible infrastructure allows movement by looking at the sun and turning 120 degrees left, but it does. So how do they explain this? In this case, what should be said is necessary. We don't know this part. Instead of saying, we don't know the reason for what this animal does, but what it does is this, interestingly, they say there is something called instinct in the animal and it makes it do this. First of all, to say that something called instinct, something non-material, exists in an animal refutes materialism. That's one thing. It shoots itself in the foot. One. Secondly, it is a terrible mistake. What is it? We give a name to the behavior we see in the animal. The name of this is instinct. The thing called instinct is the naming, from our perspective, of the action the animal performs. But what does atheism do? It substitutes this naming for the agent. This is ignorance. This is a lack of sophistication. This is foolishness. Just like saying the law is the reason for the constancy in the universe, whereas law is the name we give to the constancy in the universe. Instead of knowing that it is a definition of how, it is a trick to accept it as the reason for the how. Similarly, to say that the perfect actions seen in animals, which are simply given a name, originate from instinct is a perfect example of ignorance. There is no center in an animal related to instinct, there is no such organ, and there is no such thing. An animal with the infrastructure to describe a movement like go 120 degrees to the right of the sun is not what you call instinct. Whatever you may call such an animal, it can't get out of an open window 5 centimeters to its left. The act of a bee making honey is surely more perfect than getting out of a window. While it can't get out of the window 5 centimeters to its left, it can go 120 degrees to the left of the sun where the flower nectar is. It is inconsistent for it to perform that so-called movement. Therefore, this act does not belong to the animal. But there is an act there. To define this act in the past, some people, its real name is divine drive, but sometimes it has been called natural drive. And then people today call it instinct. There is no information whatsoever about the existence of something called instinct. What is the information that exists? For certain? How so? It's like gravity. We drop the stone, it falls. So why does it fall? What science has determined is this. The stone falls from such a height at such a speed. This is the domain of science. So why does it fall? For example, why not by increasing at a speed of 9.8 meters per second, not 9.7, for example, not 7, not 6, not 10. We don't know that. What do we know? That the stone falls. What is certain is that the stone falls. Our knowledge of why it falls is an interpretation. We don't know if they are pulling from below or pushing from above. Therefore, we first need to draw a boundary for our knowledge. Now, the trickery of atheism here is to take the information that explains a certain subject and through trickery present it as the explanation for another subject, and while explaining the how, to present the explanation related to the how as if it were also the explanation for the why is foolishness.
It cannot be explained with good intentions anyway.
It is an indecency, first and foremost. There is also a perfect act in the animal. By the way, this movement, which is called instinct, has a certain characteristic, a characteristic that separates it from other normal movements in daily life. And what is that? The movement called instinctive movement occurs by calculating not for the animal itself, but for its species. For example, if an animal needs to die for the continuation of its species, a death order is given and the animal sacrifices itself. Now, for something to sacrifice itself, it must yield a result for something more valuable than its own life. We clearly see that an order comes to the animal saying, you must sacrifice your life. We have no information about this, that the order comes from here or from there. What is our knowledge? The animal must sacrifice itself for the continuation of the species. It sacrifices itself. What separates the so-called instinctive behavior from normal behavior is that it considers the species, not the individual, of the movement. It shows that it acts with thought. What is our knowledge here? That this movement occurs. Okay, what is the reason? If we look at the reason from an atheist's perspective, there is no explanation. But the trickery here is to give a name to a movement we see here and present that name as its cause. Atheism does this a lot. It does it in every subject. Why does light travel at 300,000 kilometers per second? Well, because it's light. Why does electricity travel at such a speed? Well, because it's electricity. That's not an explanation. The fact that that thing is named electricity doesn't explain why electricity travels at that speed. Calling something light doesn't explain why it travels at 300,000 kilometers per second. So people give a name, a title to an issue, and by doing so they trivialize it. As a result, it closes the door to thinking and contemplation. Atheism does this constantly. Or rather, atheism is forced to do this because atheism has no other kind of capital. It inevitably has to take advantage of your ignorance, confuse the how and the why, take the explanation within one event and present it as if it's the answer to another event. Otherwise, it cannot exist. Atheism. Of course, many people will fall for this. Those who fall for it won't know the levels of knowledge. They won't realize what knowledge is, what science is, what wisdom is. They won't realize what natural science is. They won't know what a law is. They won't know that a law is just a name for something. To someone who doesn't know it's not the cause of constancy, but its expression, they will swallow whatever you tell them. And indeed, atheism makes them swallow it. Seeing a perfect behavior in an animal and saying, well, there's no need for reason. To say this is instinct in it means that the issue is being explained through mindlessness. This is mindlessness. It means either not knowing the issue at all or knowing it and concealing it. We see the existence of the behavior in the animal, and we give that behavior a name. I think during World War II, I hope I'm not wrong about the date, in Australia, 2 animal species clash. Of course, if I remember correctly, one is an ostrich, the other a panther. It could be something else entirely. I mean, 2 animal species clash. As a result, millions of one of them die. Okay, in Australia. Then you see hundreds of thousands from Africa. Vultures migrate to Australia to eat the carrion. Now, I will explain this. What do I say? Instinct. Instinct is the name of this event. The animal has no way of discovering a being in Africa from 20,000 kilometers away. Materially, it's just not possible. He also knows that it cannot be explained materially. Atheism. Atheism already knows that this action cannot be explained by matter. It gives it a name, a non-material instinct. It completely trivializes the event. However, what we know here is that the vulture went. So why does it go? How does it go? We have no knowledge of that. Of course, there is an explanation. The explanation is not what they say it is. Of course, inside the animal, there isn't something more than the animal. More intelligent, more clever, or a super-rational being. That's obvious. There's no such thing. Of course, it's obvious that something is directing it, but to explain this act of direction within nature itself is truly the pinnacle of ignorance. However foolish it is to bring up the properties of marble as the reason for a marble statue being in human form, and to explain it by saying, of course, the marble will take a human shape, just to avoid accepting a sculptor, explaining this perfect behavior in animals by saying that something, in quotes, within the animal itself is the cause, is the same kind of ignorance. So if you've noticed, the issue comes full circle and comes back to ignorance. That's why, as we mentioned before, if you remember, the greatest enemy of Islam is Amr ibn Hisham. Muslims gave him the name of Islam's other great enemy. What is it? Abu Jahl, the father of ignorance. Why? Because Islam has only one enemy, and that is ignorance. This is why, by accepting the law, they say there is instinct. They accept that within the animal, there is something more perfect than the animal itself. Decisions. That can make the animal more perfect, to accept the existence of something that guides it for the continuation of the species to places its own limbs cannot reach. It is an ignorance just like searching for the cause of a human statue made of marble in the properties of the marble itself. Yes, atheism is an ignorance. It is nothing more than that.
Now, here's an interesting thought that comes to mind, Professor. For example, think about it. Atheists and evolutionists call the cause of this wonderful act they see in animals by a name they made up. That is instinct. However, there is no device in the animal's body that we can materially see with our eyes. Now, they call this instinct, and this instinct is being forced upon us under the name of scientificity. It is said that this is scientific. Look, this explanation has become scientific. Now, what if I were to say this? What if I, as a religious man, as a Muslim, said, my brother, none of the atoms in this animal's body have a mind. They have no mind, no knowledge, no consciousness. Therefore, they cannot do these things. What if I said this is not an inner drive, but an outer drive? Meaning, when I say it is being driven by someone from the outside, that someone from the outside is guiding it, my statement becomes a belief. My saying it becomes dogma. It becomes a belief. But theirs becomes scientificity. In reality, there is no difference between the two.
Rationally, there is actually, but from which perspective? It's against them. Rationally, atheism is a belief. To say that a needle we find in a cave must have a maker is not a belief. To say it has no maker is a belief. Atheism is a belief because it attributes to matter properties that are not in the nature of matter. Attributing properties not found in the nature of matter to someone external is knowledge.
Professor, if they were to say, friends, both of these are beliefs. If they said, what we say is not scientific either, this is also a belief, we would accept it. But for what they say, which they don't see, in fact, there is no such organ materially in the animal's body anyway. You call a name, you've given it scientificity. What is said by someone else in the name of religion, which also sounds logical, even more logical, you call that a belief. I mean, friends, at least call both of them beliefs. There is nothing as truly difficult to stomach as this being forced on us under the name of scientificity, of the work.
The existence of a master is not a belief. To say that it doesn't exist is a belief. So in fact, the situation is the exact opposite.
True.
In reality, but rationally? Rationally. Atheism is a bit foreign to reason. That's why we have to speak rationally of a thing, of a work that is found in a state different from its raw material, in quotation marks. What is different from its raw material? A pot that is found different from clay. There is a difference. To say that this difference was not created by the clay is not a belief. But to say that it is a belief that the clay itself created it, to say it can come about this way, is a belief. That is why atheism is a belief. But to attribute something being brought into a state different from its raw material to a cause other than its raw material is not a belief, it is knowledge. This is the reality. But what does atheism say? Just like the marble statue. Just as it is a belief that the cause of a human-shaped marble statue is the marble itself, which has nothing to do with reason, it is also a belief to think that the atoms in the universe are the cause of humans, or the cause of living animals, or the cause of plants. A child in the womb has eyes, but the womb is dark. A child in the womb has ears, but there is no sound in the womb. A child in the womb has lungs, but the lungs are filled with water. There is no AIR. Its hands and feet are of no use. These are organs that will be useful in the world it will go to after 9 months and 10 days. So, is designing organs that will be useful in the world it will go to after 9 months and 10 days the work of mindless, unconscious atoms? If this is said to be the result of interactions, changes, environmental adaptation, etc., that occurred in atoms over centuries, then that is a belief. But to say that this was shaped is knowledge. In reality, the matter is the exact opposite. If we notice, it's actually the opposite. The existence of a creator is not a belief. To say that there is no creator is a belief. Logically, of course. If one has a mind, this is the conclusion. So where is the belief? In that case, the nature of that creator's attributes is a belief. Even the existence of its attributes is not a belief. It is knowledge. The nature of the attributes is a belief. Of course, if atheism had the capacity to think about this issue that much, it wouldn't be atheism.